Hello, everyone. Thank you very much for joining us for this webinar about building soil monitoring into policy. Today's webinar is being hosted by the Soil Association. We're a UK charity that's worked to transform the way we eat, farm and care for our natural world for over 75 years. As our name suggests, we are rooted in the idea that good soil health lies at the heart of a sustainable and productive food and farming system. I'm Gareth Morgan, and I'm head of the farming policy team at the Soil Association, and a large part of my work is influencing government policy to favour action to improve soil health. The Soil Association is working in collaboration with 26 other partner organisations across Europe on this EU Horizon funded project, AI for Soil Health. Before I properly introduce today's session and speakers, just a few bits of housekeeping. Firstly, today's webinar is being recorded, so we'll be able to share a link with you after the event is complete, and you'll be welcome to revisit the content and share it with colleagues. The format of the event today is as follows. There'll be a short introduction. Our three speakers will give their presentations, and then we'll move to host audience question and answer. Throughout the session, we'll be using Mentimeter, which is an interactive online platform, so you can engage live with the session. Joining instructions are in the chat and on screen. We'll also be inviting your comments and questions because we'll be keen to hear from you. So look out for the question and answer chat box, which will be on the screen. If you can think of any questions you'd like to pose for speakers at any point, just type it into the Q&A box, and I'll be trying to pose as many of them as possible to our speakers during the question and answer session, which will come towards the end of the session. Please also feel free to introduce yourself in the chat. We've enjoyed seeing engagement between attendees in the series in previous webinars. If there's any technical difficulties, my colleague Maddie is on hand. Do message her in the chat and she will try and help. So just first of all, an introduction to AI for soil health for those of you unfamiliar with the project. The background to this is, as we all know, the health of soils across Europe is under threat. A transition to a more sustainable future for soils is possible, but in practice, the risk of innovation to land managers is high. So we need to get better understanding of what farm and land management practices work best and which don't, to protect the environment and to make businesses more resilient in the face of changing times. The AI for Soil Health project, which is funded by Horizon Europe, is building an AI-powered soil health monitoring system to accelerate the collection and use of soil information. We therefore will aim to help farmers and land managers to measure soil health without the need for laboratories. And additionally, this will help policymakers examine the changes they make and give them up-to-date modelling on their plans and reliable data on the impact they're having. The climate crisis leaves little room for mistakes. Soil is complex, and we need the ability to map changes into the future to make the right policies for the right region. AI for Soil Health is at the forefront of working with stakeholders to co-design, create and harness digital technology to support pan-European efforts to halt and reverse soil health decline. We want to achieve a world where every farmer can do their own on-farm experimentation on soil health. This means using the latest scientific expertise and building digital infrastructure to support them so they can innovate and track their actions in real time. From July to November, the project has been hosting the Envisaging the Future of Soil Health Monitoring series, a series of 5 online events, each focused on a single hot topic at the intersection of soil science, digital innovation, and EU policy. Today is the 4th and penultimate webinar in the series. Welcome to this webinar, which is about building soil monitoring into policy. And clearly this is very timely in light of the adoption of the EU Soil Monitoring Directive recently. We're joined by AI for Soil Health project partners to discuss opportunities and challenges of implementing this new soil monitoring law. The panel will explore how robust soil data can bridge the gap between science and policy, what practical steps are needed to embed monitoring into national programmes, and how collaborative projects can accelerate progress towards healthier soils across the EU. Now, just before I introduce our three speakers, we have some quick questions for you, our audience. And to do that, you'll need to join the Menti, which the QR code is on the screen now, or you can go to menti.com and enter the joining code, which is the 8-digit code that's also on the screen, or there's a link in the chat to this. So the code has been on the screen there, and let's move on to the questions, and be interesting to gather your views about the questions. The first question here, you'll have about a minute to answer this. Hopefully you're now signed into Menti. So just a bit of information about yourselves. What are your domains of expertise around this? So that's the first question. So give an indication of your background. Well, we've got a range of people here in the session, quite a lot of people involved in policy, some involved in the science, some involved in data and AI. So thank you very much for your replies there. A lot of people involved in soil health science and research, a lot of practitioners and farmers representatives, those involved in land use, and then we've also got some actually involved in more in the AI and data science side of things. Great, okay, thanks very much for your replies to that. So just moving on to the next question. What scale do you predominantly work on? Are you working locally, regionally, nationally, or at a continental European-wide level? So let us know what your main engagement is. Looks like we have a lot of people involved at the national scale, and obviously a lot of countries involved in this project. Some people working more at the EU level, and then quite a lot of people working at the subnational, regional, and local levels as well. So a really interesting spread of practitioners here. So thank you very much for answering that. And then question about what was your motivation for joining this discussion today? So if you can great, just enter your interests in this particular discussion about the policy dimension of soil monitoring. Great, some interesting answers coming up here. Just people for increase their general awareness. Some people aware of the new soil monitoring law and interested to know how that plays into this. Some people interested in the more technical side and the technology that's being developed here. Great, lots of interesting, quite a diverse audience by the look of it there. So great, thank you very much for giving us some information about that. And then moving on to a final question, how have you been involved in the development of the soil monitoring law? So interested to know whether you have had any involvement, whether direct, indirect involvement. Might be some people here who haven't come across the soil monitoring law potentially, others who might plan to be, but a lot of people who've not been involved in the soil monitoring law. So that's very useful to know, particularly I think Giovanna is going to give us some background on that. So that'll be helpful to bring everyone up to speed with the recently adopted law, which of course it is quite recent. So perhaps not surprising that most of the audience, by the look of it, have not been involved with the EU soil monitoring law. So thanks very much for your engagement. Do keep submitting answers, but I'm going to now introduce our first speaker, Giovanna Giuffre, who's a senior researcher and partner at Isinova, which specialises in foresight, policy analysis and stakeholder engagement at the Science Policy Dialogue. She's got over 15 years of experience in EU research projects focused on sustainability, land management and agriculture, and will share insights from the AA for soil health stakeholder consultations and highlight the need for detailed soil data to inform good policy. So I'm now going to hand over to Giovanna to give her presentation. Thank you very much.
Hello, good morning. Thank you, Gareth. I will try to share my slide and see if I manage to do in full mode. Let's see, it should be working. So hello, good morning. My name is Giovanna Giuffre. I have a legal background, so I'm the strange in the room, but in the last 20 years, I've been working across environmental policy, and I'm very happy to be here today, and thank you for Soil Association for organizing the webinar. I try to give a title that is Connecting the Peace, Policy, Data and Research for Europe Soil Health, because I think it's really an endeavor that we should commit to, how to ensure that policy, research, and technology advance are able to make an impact in the practice. And the timing is right. It's a difficult time for many levels of society. And I think it's time to break the silos and to be sure that we are able to speak to each other and work in the same direction. My presentation will try to give an overview in 10 minutes of the policy landscape and process, but also to support strategic thinking on what is the role of science and what can play to support change towards sustainability. And if we speak about impact and change in society, my first idea was to look back in time. So look at 2019, when the European Green Deal was proposed in the first mandate of Ursula von der Leyen, the President of the European Commission. And that was the landscape background when soil went back to the, let's say, table of policy. And it contained a number of strategies. Many of them were based on the use of resource and soil. So it regarded the soil as a carbon pool for all the climate ambition, but it also concerned soil in the circular economy, soil biodiversity, soil contamination, and soil in farming practice. So this is where we were, and was a different timing. It was pre-COVID when it was announced, and the green transition was very strong, let's say, in the political agenda. Then it seems really long time ago, because the global situation had changed, and also the political situation changed since then. But this framework led to the construction of a puzzle, what we can see as a puzzle, that was formed by really the commitment to create a policy framework for soil, at the same time use soil data reservoir and funding mechanism for research. So one of these is Mission Soil, a deal for soil, that is one of the 5 missions of the European Commission, and many projects were funded under this umbrella. At the same time, policies start working for soil, and I think has been quite successful if we look back. So there's been the approval of the Mission Soil Deal with the implementation plan with objective. There's been the approval of the EU Soil Strategy, and finally, few weeks ago, the approval of the Soil Monitoring Law. There's been a long process, and some projects that work, let's say, also in the interface were approved before, let's say, having the text of the legislation, and that creates a bit of a mismatch and a need of speaking, understanding of what it meant for researcher and for policy soil, and how we can increase our understanding. So I think there is the need for policy to use evidence produced by science. At the same time, it's great if scientists could at least be aware of the policy process that are going on, because diseases are shaping the next decade somehow, part of it, and it would be great if we can at least speak and understand each other. It was approved, as you probably know, the 23rd of October by the Parliament. This is the news published by the European Parliament office. And it's interesting how the law is presented, because it's new law with better support for farmers. So what we can read across the line is that there is an intention for connecting the soil monitoring also for a promotion of sustainability, especially on the agriculture sector. At least this is an impression. And if we look at the policy structure, what it requires is really that all member states set a monitoring framework to assess trend and report to European Commission after 6 years. So after 6 years, the Commission will have 1 year to carry out an evaluation and review and take decision whether it's the case to revise the directive as a for example, including targets that are at the moment not present. So the text contains just aspirational targets for soil health, not binding target for member state. Is a political compromise. It contains a lot of flexibility for member state on the way it will be implemented. At the same time, was historical, was a very important process. I believe many have provided evidence and tried to improve the text. Was difficult to reach an agreement across different countries, different interests, and it gives the same protection or similar protection that was already granted to water and to air, to soil, that at this stage was not covered by any legislation at EU level. What it contains is also a definition of soil health, and might be trivial for some of you working on soil health or not, but it is important because it ensures that soil health is considered also in other legislation in similar way. So there is an environmental responsibility. There are different directives that consider soil health, but there were not an agreement on the definition of soil health. It covers all soil, but member state will be able to exclude some critical area. It contains also a reference to food security, and it considers all the function of soil, trying to balance the different function of soil and link soil with ecosystem service. So I think that is, even if you don't agree, it's important that you relate with this definition in the project. That will be my suggestion. These are 5 aspects that will be recalled in my presentation, and I think also by Lucas, is not giving a full overview of the directive, but these are 5 aspects that I think are important. So it requires member states to create soil district and soil unit to monitor soil and to designate a competent authority. So there will be someone responsible for the monitoring. It has probably, there is always in some countries, but this is just one recognition from also a European level. Member state, it recognizes also, it requests member state to monitor 13 aspects of soil degradation. These are described in the annex of the text, and also specify criteria for this aspect. It also gives the European Commission a quite important role to provide reference map, baseline sample, and legacy service data, and assist upon request via Lucas program, also member state on the monitoring. There will be an announcement and drawing of the digital soil health data portal that is already existing, but probably will reach a different, let's say, importance also for coordination member state activities. And this will be direct to ensure that member states provide comparable, high quality, and interoperable soil health data. And we have seen this process also for health data. So it's very hard to get member states with similar data at different scale. And most importantly, there is this Article 10 that encouraged member states to support, facilitate sustainable practice. And there is a number of initiatives member states should carry out, from funding, knowledge exchange. And this is something I think especially project in research could explore at national level, how to support the setting up of this practice. Finally, we start looking back, and now we look at the future. So the situation has changed. There is a second mandate for Ursula von der Leyen, but the new word, let's say, is a new word also on the table, is competitiveness. And I think it's also important to understand that in the next 10 years, what might be also the aspect of soil, and which kind of policy soil will be considered. As you know, the Draghi report is the basis for this strategy. It's a very easy to read, relatively easy to read. It's not complex to read, but it points out some change and some main aspect that Europe should work on. And I think especially on decarbonization and competitiveness, but also reducing dependency and increasing security are aspects that are based on agriculture and soil, beyond the technology with closing innovation gap that is, recently, GRC has published a paper that I think mark also the future, at least of how science and policy, what is the compass, how this compass is adapted to soil. So, and it looks how soil is also a resource to boost competition, competitiveness. And there are aspects related to decarbonization, closing the gap, and reducing dependency. And it spans from carbon farming, circular economy, regenerative economy, regenerative agriculture. And I think it will be important when we think about monitoring and data, who will be the end user of this data? What practice we want to support? How we can engage with this stakeholder? So having in mind the end user of your research or your activity is extremely important from my side. And we recently published with the partner a brief that is available on the website that goes more in depth on the different articles of the directive. And if you have questions, do not hesitate also to contact me. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thanks, Giovanna. And what a lovely, friendly little robot you got to show us there.
I don't know.
That was really helpful. And for all those people in the webinar who are unfamiliar with the soil monitoring law, that's a really helpful background around how the law has come about and what the main provisions of it are. So it will be interesting to get your response now to this Menti question, which we put up, about what you think might be the greatest barriers to implementing the EU soil monitoring law in practice, either at member state level or at the European Commission level. So if you've got views on that, it will be really useful to get your thoughts about which of these issues do you think might be barriers to implementation of the law. Just give people a few moments to have a look at that and give answers to that. And lots of people identifying lack of harmonized data and indicators. And obviously this AI for Soil Health project is all about looking at practical ways of developing data sets. So harmonization of data, clearly a key issue for lots of people. The need to define what healthy soil and metrics are, which has always been a challenge at the state level, is now going to be an even bigger challenge at the European level. Quite a lot of people identifying need for funding for some of this work, but obviously part of what we're doing here is to try and develop lower cost ways of actually doing some of this stuff, so funding becomes a bit less of a barrier. The need to develop targets under this, so that it's a very much a monitoring law at the moment, and now over to member states. It hasn't got EU binding targets, so maybe that's something that will come later. Great. Okay, thanks for those answers. We'll analyse those a little bit more when we're looking at the results of the webinar. Thank you very much, Giovanna. That was a really helpful background. And now we're going to move on to hear from Professor Mohins Grev, who is Professor and Head of Soil Section at the Institute of Agroecology at the Aarhus University in Denmark. He's responsible for the national Danish soil databases and coordination of policy support at Aarhus University within the area of remote sensing and soil. Professor Mohens Grev has extensive experience in soil spectroscopy, soil classification, mapping, and digital mapping. And his research interests involve study of soil variability and soil mapping in general, both from the field scale up to national scale. He's interested in soil mapping for specific purposes, for example, classification of forest sites and mapping of Danish terroir. So I'm going to hand over to Mohens for a presentation about how some of this looks at the national level, and some of the issues that are going to be presented around soil monitoring and classification. Over to you, Mohens.
Thank you for the introduction, Garrett. Very nice. And I'll try to give you a little bit of introduction to AI for soil health and our interaction with policy. Madeleine is controlling my slides, so we will see if we can get it up and running here. Garrett gave a good introduction to AI for soil health before. I'll just pin out some of the main objectives of what we have been working for the last 3 years. And we have I'll just mention 4 of the main objectives here. We have been developing a robust indicator selection framework. I'll come back to that later. We have created an overview of possible indicators and developing new indicators. We have been establishing a soil health data cube, which contains soil properties at pan-European scale in 30-meter resolutions. And we have been developing and are developing and establishing a set of soil monitoring units and methods how landowners and politicians could actually benchmark soil health on local scales. Thank you. These are sort of the key aspects where AI for soil health actually interact directly with policy and policymakers. And Giovanni just mentioned it briefly. I'll take one of these in turn and give some examples on what we actually been working with. And then the last part, soil districts and soil units, Lucas Gomez will take over and give you an introduction to some of the work we have been doing here, exemplified with the work in Denmark, which is it's a very good pilot site to work with because we are so data rich in Denmark. So he will present that later on. Next slide, please. Giovanna just briefly mentioned soil health, and soil health is basically a healthy soil. This is a soil in good condition supporting ecosystem services for man and nature. Basically, that's the definition. But how do we actually measure soil health? It's not as we can take a soil sample and send it to a certified lab, and they'll come back with a number. You're from 0 to 10. Your soil is healthy 5. It's not how it works actually, because we only have indirect indicators of soil health, and in the soil monitoring law there has been mentioned a number of different health indicators. As you can see, there's a number going down here in the rows specifying all the different indicators of soil health or soil degradation actually, and we have to relate to all these. This soil monitoring law came out after we started the project actually, so we were a little bit behind already from the beginning, but we have been catching up as good as we could. Next slide, please. One of the first things we have been working was to develop a soil health indicator selection framework. You could say that the soil health indicators has already been selected, but they are actually only preliminary. It's stated in the law there will be a revision on the soil monitoring law after the first round of monitoring, say in 5 to 6 years. So it's very important that we have sort of a consolidated way to evaluate a soil health indicator. For example, can we measure the soil health indicator? Is it relatively cost efficient? How does the soil health indicator vary in time? For example, soil texture is not a very good soil health indicator because it changes very, very slowly. Whereas, for example, soil carbon changes within 10, 20 year time scale. So that could be relevant here. We also looked at the stakeholder needs. What are they interested in, and what could be relevant for stakeholders to look into? Is it soil biology? Is it soil carbon? Is it, for example, bulk density? So these aspects need to be taken into account. Beside the temporal aspect, we also have the spatial aspect. Is it possible to go back and measure the same property again and again if you want at the same time, or is the spatial variability simply so big that it makes no sense? So there's a lot of indicators, a lot of things we need to take into account before we select the soil health indicators, and this is described in this soil health indicator selection framework we have been developed. Next slide, please. I also mentioned that we are trying to develop new soil health indicators, and as I said, we are very lucky to have a lot of soil data in Denmark, so we can actually test different soil health indicators in Denmark to see if it's possible to, for example, map it. And here we have two proposed soil health indicators we have been mapped here. And on the left-hand side, you see the soil water repellency, where you can see how that varies across Denmark. So you can see that in the western part of Denmark, we have the very high values of soil water repellency linked to mainly the sandy soils and areas with a lot of forested areas. If we look at the right hand side, we look at the nitrosphere, the relatively abundance in the eDNA, and here you can see that they are very much linked also to the western part, where we have high number of cattle in the agricultural systems. Next slide, please. Another important aspect we are working with in the project is actually trying to achieve easy ways to measure soil health indicators. And one of the things we have been testing is field-based soil spectroscopy methods. There's a number of challenges when you use soil spectroscopy in field sites, and these are the challenges we have been trying to overcome. With soil spectroscopy, we can actually measure a lot of the soil health indicators. Carbon, we can measure pH, we can measure some kind of structural indices also, and this is really relevant for a lot of different actors. Next slide, please. Another method we have been testing out is a soil enzymatic activity developed by a company, DigitSoil, where they try to sort of relate enzymatic activities, for example, to gross turnover of the microbiome. We can also measure, for example, the mineralizable nitrogen in the project in the soil. And this is a very easy way to do it, and it's the cost of this instrument is actually so we can envision that it's actually would be available at big farms or in the extension services. Next slide, please. The next objective was to develop sort of a pan-European digital twin, and here we have a sort of a screen dump from our EcoData Cube, which is being developed by a company OpenGeoHub. And here you see a pan-European map of soil carbon in 30-meter resolutions. And this is actually we are building an app so actors can actually interact with the databases here and benchmark their soils towards peers, farmers or land soil managers with the same soil types and same management practices. Still, I would say that we lack data in this data cube, and our prediction, the functionality will be much better as the monitoring in Europe progresses, and these data will flow in to the centralized databases. Next slide, please. Yeah, can you go forward? Yeah, thank you. Stakeholder activities is important, of course, for our project, and will be increasingly important when we try to implement a new soil monitoring law. And we have been directly engaged with stakeholders across Europe in our pilot sites. We have 11 pilot sites covering all pedoclimatic regions there, and we have been engaging with the farmers on these pilot sites where we have been taking soil samples and testing field equipment and testing the sensors I just mentioned here. Another way we have been engaging farmers, next slide please, farmers, next slide, actors, is we have been performing what we call a mass experiment. It's a very big student science project. We have been doing this autumn actually, where we have been engaging with 20,000 students in Denmark, all the way from primary school to high school students, where they were digging soil profiles and describing land use, soil structure, soil profile, counting earthworms. And the more advanced of them has actually been taking soil samples home to their classrooms and measuring pH, texture, structure, and bulk density. So they are measuring actually quite a lot of soil health indicators, and it has been a fantastic project. And we are now actually working with the data they have uploaded to our server. So this is really interesting. Another thing here is actually that we have obtained funding so they could send in soil samples for us. So we have been received Denmark soil samples actually from land use they chose. So it's really interesting to see the soil samples they have been shipping to us, and we have been characterizing in soil physical properties. We will do a non-target screening for pollutants, and we're also going to measure eDNA of these samples. So this is going to be really interesting. To get towards healthy soils, we need to work with soil care, of course, and that's actually also a very important part of the soil monitoring law in the Article 1011, where we are sort of training farmers and soil managers to manage their soils in a more sort of sustainable way. The reason why this is important is because we cannot wait until the monitoring's first round is done. We have a deadline for healthy soils in Europe, or we aspire to get healthy soils by 2050. So we need to start now to be able to turn the tide for all the soils in Europe. Another reason why it's very important is that we only measure soils in points, and we need to change soil health everywhere. So we need to change soil practices throughout the landscape. And it is also very good for communication. You have to change this practice to that practice, so it's a good way to discuss with the soil managers. Another reason why it's very important is because it's easy to control by remote sensing, and it's easy to implement in the CAP system. Next slide, please. If we look at what element a soil care index could contain, is some of the things we already know. people to things to do and things not to do. So we can do conservation tillage, we can reduce traffic, we can apply no pesticide agriculture, and we have to address a lot of these elements here to change from intensive farming practices into a more sustainable farming practices. And these element is, of course, not, we don't expect all farmers to do all this at the same time. So next slide, please. So we expect actually to have targeted soil care practices or strategies. For example, here's again a map of Denmark, and we can see that, for example, the soil organic carbon status on the left map. We can see the circle in the western part of Denmark where we have above typical and typical carbon content. We don't need to do specific practices to improve that. Whereas in the southeast of Denmark, we have large areas with below typical soil organic practices, and here we actually need to introduce, for example, vegetation covers. We need to introduce grass in the rotation practices, etc. On the right-hand side, we see the nitrogen leaching from Denmark again, and in the left side we have a lot of animal in the landscape. So here we actually need perhaps to reduce the number of animals to get the nitrogen leaching down to a normal level. Whereas in the southeast of Denmark, we don't need to address this issue of soil health. Next slide, please. And this is sort of a table which gives you an idea on this with the targeted practices. For example, if we have loss of carbon here, there are a number of activity we could recommend the farmers to do. For example, reduce tillage, no pesticides, using organic fertilizers, using permanent vegetation covers, and do erosion control. So for each of the problems we have here on the left-hand side, we will have measures or soil care activities we can recommend the farmers to mitigate his problem. So this is sort of a link between the soil monitoring and the practitioners. Next slide, please. Yeah, okay, thank you. This was the last slide.
Great. Thank you, Mayans. That was fascinating. And I'm always encouraged when I hear soil scientist practitioners make clear that lack of total information doesn't mean we can't start doing some of this stuff. So really interesting to hear your suggestions about the sort of measures that can be put in place straight away, and also hear about the scale of potential data that we can be gathering. So that citizen science work with school children sounds really fascinating as well. So thank you very much for that. And a quick Mentimeter to gather some views around a question that arises from Mohan's presentation there. I'd be interested to get views about what activities does the Soil Care Index fail to capture? So what elements of that index are missing still at the moment? So I'd be interested to get any views on that, again, using the Menti poll. Any views on that? Perhaps that relies on a level of knowledge around the index that people don't feel competent with, but yeah, some thoughts coming in already on that question there. And I was struck with that citizen science work. Presumably this sort of thing can be extended to the farming community as well. So increasingly getting the ability now for farmers themselves to engage with soil monitoring. And I think at the next webinar, some of my colleagues at Soil Association Exchange, which are developing protocols for soil monitoring in the UK, will be presenting. So thoughts coming through here on some of the issues that the index is perhaps failing to capture and needs to be extended to. Yeah, please continue to put in your views on that. And I'm now going to move forward to our next and final speaker for this initial session. I'm delighted to introduce Dr. Lucas Gomez, who's a postdoc researcher at the soil physics section at the same Department of Agroecology at Aarhus University. And Lucas has been working in soil science with an emphasis on soil monitoring, ecosystem services, and spatial monitoring. And he is going to deliver his presentation, picking up from where Mohin's has got to in the previous presentation. So handing over now to Lucas.
Thanks, Gareth, for the introduction. I'm going to share my presentation. Can you see it?
Yep, that's great.
Presentation mode, Lucas.
Yeah. Can you see now the presentation mode?
No.
No?
Yeah, now it is.
Now, good. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, hello everyone that it's watching. We are moving now from the soil monitor law on more the policy perspective to the practice. How can we implement the soil monitor law? So I'm going to talk with you the Danish case, the experience that we have here in Denmark, and we have been working last year, and also within soil health, AI for soil health. So this is most already presented are the key aspects, how AI for soil health can support the soil monitor law. I'm going to talk a little bit more about the soil districts and soil units here, and how we did in Denmark, we are doing. Before we start, I have to give some background about the Danish monitoring systems. So in Denmark, we have the Novana. Novana is a very big program of monitoring. So actually they are monitoring several aspects of nature, animals, like small animals, birds, vegetation types. And the Danish authorities, they really embrace the soil monitor law. So they have already decided that the soil monitoring law will be a new mod on the Novana monitoring program. So this will bring the soil to this big program, and will be everything harmonized and centralized. So it also means that in Denmark, we will have one soil district. We will not have different soil districts. So with this, we had support the Ministry of Green Transition during the review of the soil monitor law. And last year, during the Belgian presidency, together with GRC and all the member states, we conduct a test of the sampling sites. So during this exercise, we are giving a code where we should work, everyone with the same code, and simulate the implementation of the soil monitor law. So we worked with the Belgian presidency and our ministry, and then after the ministry say, okay, ask for all those universities, how can we want to know more about it? So they want to know specifically about the delineation of the soil units, and what would be the possible number of and location of sample sites, and also the costs. So we did this report. It was a small report, a note for the ministry, where we work with those three topics mainly. So that's what I'm going to show to you today, what we have been doing. Yeah, the soil monitoring units is the starting point, is the stratify layer that we use. Here, for this exercise, I use a clustering process to generate the soil units. In this case, I just use soil texture maps and slope. Denmark is quite flat, but we can see some difference according to the slope on the soil. And in this process, we selected 10 soil units for Denmark. And then we combine the soil units with the land use from 2022, but here just cover the large land use like agriculture, grassland. So we didn't have a specific forest. For example, we didn't have forest species here. But as I said, this exercise was done at the start of last year. So now we are working on a revision of the soil units. And we are using another method, hierarchical method. Here is a work from our colleague. He developed new soil units. Here you can see there are more than 20. Yeah, more than 20 soil units where we have different soil type and terrain landscape positions, the soil units. So once we delineate the soil units, we calculate the number and location of soil samples, the sampling sites. For this, we use 7 soil health indicators: organic carbon, soil-clay ratio, bulk density, pH, plant available water, saturated hydraulic conductivity, and a biological one that is nitrate, oxidizing bacteria. And follow the soil monitor law requirements. We use the Bethel algorithm and the 5% coefficient of variation of the soil health indicator values. I'm not going to detail here on the model that we have used, but all these soil health indicators, they were maps. So the starting point for Denmark, I random select 100,000 points across Denmark. And from these 100,000 points, we applied the model. And for each soil unit, the model selected the amount of points, the minimum amount of points to reach this 5% coefficient of variation. So at the end, I'm going to show to you, we have the selected points or the suggest select points for monitoring. But there are many questions. But there are many questions on the soil monitoring law that the member states will need to address by itself. For example, the target values, but also there are some minimum requirements. For example, the soil biodiversity, just the 5% of the points you need to sample for soil biodiversity, just minimum 5% of the points. And also, soil monitoring is not new in Europe, and it's not new in Denmark. So how can we align this new soil monitoring law with the existing soil monitoring sites? For instance, in Denmark, we have two types of soil monitoring. So in the left-hand side, we have the national monitoring sites. And in the right side, we have Lucas. Here we have Lucas 2018, about 200 points. And the soil monitoring sites in Denmark, the national monitoring sites, they are about 1,000 sampling sites. So the challenge now is, can we use this soil monitoring system? The challenge here is also that these monitoring systems, they are not integrated, they are not harmonized. They sample in different time during the year, or they use different methods, or they sample different soil health indicators, and they they are managed by different institutions, what also makes everything more difficult to harmonize. So based on this, we create 7 scenarios for the report for the government. Here I'm going to show just 3 of them. First one is the baseline scenario, not taking consideration the existing monitoring sites. Let's run the model to suggest the minimum points for the implementation of the monitoring system. The scenario number 2 is okay, but if you include the national monitoring sites, can we use some of the monitoring sites to establish the new soil health monitoring system? And the third one, I just replace the national monitoring sites by the Lucas soil sites. So here we can see 2 maps. The right are the results from the scenario 1. On the right hand, on the left hand side, we have the scenario where I use 5,000 points for starting. I didn't say this before, but we had 100 points. And then there is an intermediate process where I select a lower number, 5,000. And within this 5,000, I run another model to optimize and select the minimum number of sites. So if I select 5,000 points as a starting point, so it ends up with about 1,000 sites select for the monitor sites. But if I start with 7,500, so the number of sites increase. Here, I'm not considering the national monitoring sites, but in this scenario here, scenario 2, say, okay, if I insert the model, the existing monitoring sites, so in the left side hand, we can see the scenario 1, where 1,090 sites were selected, most of them agriculture. It's also because almost 60% of Danish lands are agriculture. And in the right side here, we can see the national monitor sites that were selected. So those points in the right map, they are inside the left side map. So you can see that about 200, 250 sites, they were selected, existing soil monitoring sites. And you may ask, but why we cannot use the existing monitoring sites? And there are many, we have a working group on it now, and there are many discussions. But one of the main differences is because we are using now the soil unit. So each soil unit represents a unique soil combination of soil type and landscape position. So many of the monitoring sites that programs that we have, for example, the 7 kilometers quadrat net. It's a very nice soil monitor system, but is on a regular grid. So we identify that many of those points, they represent the same soil unit. So we can optimize it and just use some of them and still represent the soil variability in Denmark. The third scenario is how many Lucas points could we use? This is important because these existing monitoring sites, you already have a history, so you have a date, and you can get a better overview of the trends. So it's optimal if you can use those sites. So here in this case, sorry, we can use few sites for cropland, grassland, and woodland. It's important to note also that most of the sites from Lucas, they are placed in agriculture land. So then we cover the soil units, we cover the selection of sampling sites, and also we did an analysis of how much it would cost the soil analysis, to analyze all the soils. So we end up with an estimation of 600 euros per sample. But here, not take in consideration, for example, the soil texture, what we are suggesting also for the ministry to measure, and also contextual information. This value is aligned with the estimate from EGP soil. It was about 500 euros. And at the end of this work, the ministry, they had a better overview what we could do and what they would need to do to implement the soil monitor law. So now we have a working group. We are improving these projections and looking specifically for each point if there are some issues and about sorry. So now we are looking specifically for the sampling sites, and we also may look for difference on, for example, in forest species, and also in agriculture, different agriculture management. Yeah, thank you.
Great. Thank you, Lucas. And I think we've got a further Menti question coming up following your presentation there. And this is around how can science and soil scientists best support the transition to healthier soils by 2050? So how can this sort of work best be used to support that ambition to achieve healthy soils across Europe? So if you've got thoughts on that, please enter those into the Menti now. We've already got a few suggestions here around collaboration, provision of evidence, standardization of measurement has been highlighted as an area where the scientific community can help. So do please put your thoughts into this. And we're now going to move on to capture questions for all three of our speakers that have arisen during the presentation. There's already a few questions appearing in the question and answer. And whilst those who are in the audience for the webinar are adding to those questions, I've got a few questions of my own just to kick things off with our speakers, if that's okay. And well, perhaps staying with you, Lucas, for the first question. Obviously, the work that you're doing there is very specific to the Danish context. Which do you think of the approaches and findings that you're getting through that work do you think might be useful across other member states? So which bits of this are shareable? And an additional question from me as well, that 600 euro cost per sample, how is that landing with policymakers? Do they regard that as achievable, or do they think this is going to be a very expensive exercise overall? Is that regarded as good value? So a few further thoughts from you, if that's all right, Lucas.
Yeah, thank you, Garrett. For the first question, yeah, as I said, each member state has the freedom to decide the soil units. So what we are working on is on a methodology to define the soil units. So we have been discussing if we should include land use on the delineation of soil units or not. The work that we published for Denmark, we describe and we reflect on that. But the soil monitoring law, they are still using the land use as one of the stratifiers for the soil unit. So what we would help in AI for soil health is more about the methodological approach. For example, also if we use clustering process, that is an automatic process of delineation, or we can use a hierarchical approach where we have soil type and then landscape position, for example. So it's more a methodological suggestion. And to the second question, what I heard from the government is that it was not expensive, the soil analysis. What is expensive will be the process of sampling. It's because you need people's work on the field and all the interaction with the farmers, and yeah.
So the figure you gave of 600 euros, that was for the analysis and not for the actual sampling, is that right?
Yeah, that's right. That's just for the laboratory analysis.
Right. Okay. So it is the sampling that may be the cost, and then I guess this idea of citizen science or farmer-driven sampling may come into that equation in that case. So finding ways of capturing that data could be potentially useful.
Yeah, I'm not sure if citizen science we can use for the soil monitoring, because there are some protocols for sampling, for example. So, but in AI for soil health, now we have one of the tasks is to look exactly for this. Can we use citizen science results, and do you compare it with our maps and our data? Yeah.
Great. Thanks for those answers, Lucas. There's a question here for Moens that I'd be interested, that's come up in the Q&A, and that is with the soil care index. How can we trust that all practices for soil health improvement are equal? Is there a risk that certain practices get overemphasized? So how do we choose to prioritize the many different practices that you highlighted there, Moens? Any thoughts on that question?
Yeah, that's really interesting. Also because the soil care practices also probably will differ on what is the aim, what is the ecosystem service we are trying to support. Is it agricultural production, or is it more environmental protection? So there is some trade-off we need to take here, and but I think it will mainly boil down to the practitioner's experience. I think if it's how they can interpret the result from the scientists, because if you are very low in carbon, and in Denmark, in the eastern part of Denmark, we are very low in carbon. In this area, we have been weed after weed in the rotation for decades now, and we are very low in carbon. So there, we need to pick a land use practices where we can improve the carbon content. For example, we have green fields. We need to have grass, legumes, and clover in the crop rotation. And then if we have that without having cattle, for example, how can we actually use this crop? So it looks very easy when we have this soil care method listed up, but there's a lot of complications when we get down to the practical issues of it. And I think that's some of the big work we need to do pointing forward. How can we actually assist the farmers in selecting the right tools? And there'll also be infrastructure, for example, because all the cattle in Denmark are in the western part. if we need to move cattle to the east, it's going to be quite expensive, but that's actually supported by the CAP policies the last 50 years. So it's actually a complex process which also involves politicians and the whole infrastructure of agriculture. This is not going to be an easy task. It's going to be very complicated. It's going to be equally complicated as the Water Framework Directive implementation, and I think perhaps even more. But the good thing is that if we have healthy soils, we also solve some of the water, the problems listed up in the Water Framework Directive, but also some of the climate issues. So I find healthy soil as a sort of a Swiss knife solving a lot of the structural problem in agriculture.
And yeah, and some of this can be done at the farm level, but some of this probably is structural policy issues that are going to need to be addressed. I suppose there's lots of different levels of this.
Exactly. It's a very complicated process to get to healthy soils, and it's only in 25 years. So I think it is a very ambitious goal, but we have to go for it, of course.
Giovanna, I'd be interested to hear your thoughts on the two presentations around the development of the methodology here, but also what some of the sort of policy and cost implications might be of the implementation of the new law.
I think was really taken as example the collaboration, especially of GP soil through the approval and examination of the soil monitoring law, because they allowed, they tested the article for soil unit and soil district. Many scientists involved in GP soil were involved on testing the different article, how it will apply in countries, and for sure it's different depending on the country structure, and that helped a lot, I think, the process of approval. So is a clear example of how science can test and improve also the legislation. Compared with the first draft of the European Commission, the European Parliament and then the Council change also based on the test, I think among them also the one of Denmark that was presented, how we can formulate an article involving soil district. At the very beginning, soil unit were not mentioned. There were just the duty to create a soil district. So I think the work of soil scientists have been key for an improvement of the legislation. At the same time, the weakness of environmental policy is often the implementation. So as we have seen with many legislation, from green procurement to environmental liability is not having the legislation in place, but also having the right implementation on the ground as a process, but also at the final goal. So we create the soil district, we create the soil unit, but then are these numbers speaking with soil function? Are these numbers used to improve practice of farmers? Are those understanding the numbers? So all the discourse made by Moen of linking indicator with practice and with the situation and function are key and should be carried out, is a discourse that should be carried out now to create the knowledge and the awareness also across different disciplines that will be involved on reading the data at the very end. I think the interpretation could be quite difficult if you don't know the overall landscape and framework you move in.
Yeah.
So the skills creation and the dialogue is really, I think, what is needed beyond data collection.
Thank you, Giovanna. Questions come in from Eleanor for perhaps Lucas would like to pick this one up around soil organic carbon clay ratio and how we can read classification of soils for this ratio. Lucas, do you want to pick that one up?
Yeah, I think for the question, This sock clay ratio, it's one of the descriptors of soil health in the soil monitor law. There were a lot of discussions if you should keep it or not. We have the UK team, AI for Soil Health, published a paper showing that this is not the best indicator for soil health, but this indicator is just to give some context. This indicator gives an idea of how healthy is the soil or how degraded is the soil. So if you have a value under 1/30, it's assumed that this soil is healthy, and if it's over, is degraded. But the issue is that depends on the amount of clay that you have in your soil. So it's not fair to compare sand soils with clay soils. The clay soils, they will be always degraded because it's just a mathematical equation. But then the final consensus was that you need to adjust these thresholds of soil clay rate for depending on your region. So the soil type that you have. So there is no universal threshold now, but this they should take in consideration, yeah, the soil texture that you are.
Thank you, Lucas. Another question here, I think probably for Moens, which is a very interesting one around actually ensuring access and permission so that the temporal series of data can be maintained. Have you any thoughts from the Danish experience about how a national monitoring programme can ensure access and permission for continuous monitoring? And I notice also one of the questions in the chat here, or one of the observations from someone working in this field. I think increasingly now there's the potential for using data from remote sensing, and whether that can provide some of the challenges around access to sites and so on. But what's your experience in Denmark around this, Mogens?
Yeah, it's actually a key question, and it's one of them we are actually discussing with the ministry at the moment, because we have this 7-kilometer grid monitoring system running now in Denmark. It's not a soil health monitoring system; it's only soil carbon monitoring system linked to the Kyoto Agreement. And we have the experience actually that we are losing points every year because the Danish system so far has been on voluntarily basis. So we have an agreement with the farmer. We talk to him. We are allowed to go there, and we have a good collaboration with them. For example, we collect activity data. We haven't touched that, but activity data on the management practices is really important for interpretation of the soil monitoring data. And we are actually losing between 3 to 5% of the points every year on this pure voluntarily basis. We have been discussing this with the ministry, and they are actually now ready to put it in the legislation to ensure that we have access to the monitoring points, to ensure sort of a long-term commitment for the farmer for us to come back. But it is problematic, because if the farmer is really angry at us, he can just empty his slurry tank in the monitoring point basically, and then it's so we need actually to have a good collaboration with the farmer. This, I think, is very tricky, and it must be something everybody actually experiences in agricultural lands, because it's we are in risk of losing points every year, and that's unacceptable.
And why? What reason do farmers give from withdrawing permission? Because I would imagine that having this data is immensely useful to them. So what do you know more about why people might drop out?
But there's a lot of things going on in the landscape. They want to build a new highway in the area, and then some land are simply taken from the government and some environmental protection discussions, and in some areas there are not a very good relationship between government and farmers.
Okay.
It's very poisonous, the discussion.
So it
And
might
this is
reflect other issues, not to do with the soil monitoring then.
exactly. They're
Yeah.
just sick and tired of EU regulation on nitrogen leaching and animal welfare, and they're just angry.
Yeah. Okay.
Because so I think that's also why the discussion and the engagement with farmers and actors in this area is of crucial importance, I think.
Yeah. And I guess they have to see the soil monitoring law as working in their interests in the long term and providing data that enables them to make better decisions and better productivity.
Yeah, and we are not been able to actually convince them so far, at least, that environmental politics is supporting the farmer.
Yeah.
I think soil health might be a little bit different than other environmental issues because they know that soil health, that's their business. They
Yeah.
know it.
Yeah.
Poor soil health is a consequence of their actions.
So this whole area might be a good point of connection. Yeah.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah.
So we are probably a little bit better off than pure environmental.
Great.
protection.
Okay. Thank you for that answer. We're going to have to wrap up in a moment. So, final question to you, the audience of this webinar of participants. A question about what sort of collaboration would most strengthen soil monitoring and restoration efforts across Europe. So that relates a little bit to the point we were just discussing there. So who needs to be involved in this whole exercise, including the farmers, advisors, scientists, the lawmakers, and so on. So where might collaboration help strengthen this whole process? I would be interested in the thoughts from participants around that. And while you're providing your thoughts on that question, I'll start to wrap up and first of all thank our speakers for their efforts and presentations. Some key observations about what we've heard from Giovanna, that strong steer that the law is in place now and the focus is now with member states who are going to have to transpose and implement this. And we've got that 6-year horizon and then the Commission to come back with the first report, which is quite a long way away. So hopefully action to improve soil health isn't going to wait for 6 years to happen. And implementation is obviously a very important part of this. And one of the reasons I think why there hasn't been a soils directive is member state resistance, not least from the UK when it was a member of the European Union, to soils directive. So all participants are going to have to see gathering this data as being in their interests. And in the long term, it will need to be seen as in farmers' interests, in policymakers' interests, and in all of our interests. So building a strong society support for this implementation of this law is going to be crucial. And then Mohan's talking about the close working between the AI for Soil Health project and the European Commission and the Joint Research Centre on development and implementing phases of the law. And it's great that the timing of this project couldn't have been better in terms of providing tools for implementation of this new law, and no time to lose now in terms of combining research, policy, and interests of farmers to actually drive this forward and actually see change on the ground. And then finally from Lucas, the selection stratification of monitoring units is going to be unique in each region. And selecting the number and location of monitoring sites is going to be a key factor for the success of this and being able to do this in a cost-effective way. And it was interesting to see that costs of actual analysis may not be the barrier here. So ensuring that we have enough samples to be able to monitor soils at a scale that's going to be useful for policymakers and farmers. Thank you for all of your presentations from our 3 speakers. And thank you very much to participants for your interest and engagement through the chat and the question and answer. We will be uploading the recording of the webinar, as I mentioned at the start, that will go onto YouTube, and you'll get a link to that. So please do share this. And also, if you've got more questions, or if your questions weren't answered, do reach out to the project, and we'll respond to you via that route. Also, we'd be very keen to have your feedback on today's event, and there's a link now in the chat for your thoughts on the event. So do please let us know whether it's been useful to you, and make a note of the final webinar in this series, which is Monday the 24th of November, around decoding the soil biology of soil health. So we'll be joined then by some of my colleagues in Soil Association Exchange and experts from the Commission's Joint Research Centre to look at how biological indicators can enhance monitoring, how technology is bridging the gap, and large-scale studies, what they reveal about the relationship between soil life, land use and climate across Europe. So we look forward to seeing many of you at that further webinar. Before I go, I'd just like to say thank you again to our three speakers for those excellent presentations, to you, the participants, for your stimulating questions and engagement. Do please fill out the feedback form, and thank you for attending. Look forward to seeing you at the final seminar on Monday, the 24th of November. So looking forward to seeing you at that presentation. Thank you very much, and good afternoon.
Thank you, Garrett. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Bye.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Bye.